He had the whole room laughing by roasting his own son during his retirement speech. But what he didn't know was that just a week later, he'd receive a gift that would shut everyone up. Want to know who that son was and what he did? Stick with us for this emotional and surprising story. Noah Parker wasn't like the rest of his family. While his brothers were busy simulating the stock market with trading cards, he was secretly watching late-night cooking shows, scribbling down every recipe with a pencil in his school notebook. He didn't care about numbers, didn't give a damn who was running which fund. The only thing that made him feel like he was better than yesterday was nailing a new dish. His dad, Walter Parker, called it a teenage phase, but Noah never grew out of it. He clung to his passion like a life raft, surrounded by a family that worshipped success in suits and stocks. His mom, Elise, was the only one who ever stood at those cold, silent dinner tables and said, "As long as you cook with heart, I'll always clean my plate." She was the first to hand Noah an old, beat-up cookbook, pages flagged with sticky notes. On the first page, she'd written in her own handwriting, "Flavor comes from the hands, but feeling is what people remember." Noah never forgot that line. But she passed away early. A stroke. Everything happened in 3 hours. No warning, no time to prepare. When she was gone, what was left in the Parker house wasn't grief. It was suffocation. Because the only person who ever laughed at dinner was no longer there. After that, dinner turned into a closed-door meeting. Walter sat at the head of the table, wine glass in hand, reading financial news like it was a ritual. Noah's 2 older brothers, one newly hired at a hedge fund, the other in grad school at Wharton, always had accomplishments to report. Noah didn't. Every week was the same. Walter tapped his glass whenever he wanted to speak. Then he'd turn to Noah and ask the same exact question. "When are you planning to start doing real work?" Noah didn't answer. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he already knew whatever he said would never be enough. He'd started out washing dishes at 17, then moved up to line cook at an Italian restaurant. He learned how to fillet fish, make sauces from scratch, memorize herbs the way other people memorize stock tickers. But at home, none of that mattered. When he shared that the head chef trusted him enough to handle the main course, Walter just exhaled and said, "So now you can cook dinner for the whole family? For free?" Noah stayed silent. No one said a word after that. Everything hit rock bottom the year Noah turned 30. He'd spent nearly 4 years working side jobs, saving every cent, plus taking out a small loan to open his first restaurant. It wasn't big, just 18 tables, but it was clean, bright, and every item on the menu was his own creation. He named the restaurant Hearthstone because his mom once said the kitchen was the warmest place in any home. On opening day, he sent invitations to the whole family. Walter replied 3 days later, "If my schedule allows, I'll stop by." Noah still held out hope. That night, he stood behind the counter in a clean chef's coat, waiting. His 2 brothers came with their wives, chatting among themselves, not even glancing at the menu. Walter showed up 40 minutes late. No notice, no apology. He sat down and ordered one thing, roasted lamb, then checked his watch as he ate. After 3 bites, he set his fork down, dabbed his mouth, and said, "Not bad, kinda like the food in a high school cafeteria. Just quieter." Noah stood less than 5 steps away, close enough to hear every word. He didn't respond, didn't smile, didn't turn his back. He quietly untied his apron, walked into the kitchen, and locked the door from the inside. That night, he didn't cook another dish. He just stood there in the kitchen, the place he once believed was his whole world, and watched the steady blue flame on the gas stove, burning like it too was trying to stay calm for him. Noah didn't say anything after locking that door. He just sent a short message to Julie, his fiancée. "I need some quiet." She didn't reply right away, but an hour later, she showed up with a bag of takeout and sat waiting in her car until the kitchen lights went off. They didn't talk much. Julie knew when to leave him alone and when to gently remind him who he was. A week later, the invitation arrived. A hardcover card, gold-trimmed, embossed with the name Walter Parker, Retirement Gala. The event would be held at the Belmont Grand Hotel, 48th floor, packed with VIPs from the finance world. The guest list topped 200. Noah was the last in the family to get his invite, not because it was sent late, but because no one thought to mention it to him. Walter's assistant sent it through corporate mail. No message attached. In the seating chart included, Noah wasn't listed at the family table. Instead, Table 16, guest relations and miscellaneous. He skimmed it once. Wasn't surprised. "You're really going?" Julie asked, seeing him place the card on the kitchen counter. "Probably should. One last time, and Mom would have wanted that." He said it flatly, like it was duty. Nothing more. Julie went with him. She said, "If he pulls anything, I'll be the first to walk out." Noah just gave a dry smile. "Don't bother, I'm used to it." That night, the hotel glowed gold from the outside in. A doorman swung open the main entrance, revealing tailored suits, swirling wine glasses, and smiles that looked like they'd been practiced in the mirror. Noah walked in with his hands in the pockets of a dark suit, picked out by Julie. "At least don't give him a reason to say you weren't dressed right." They made their way to the reception table where guests signed in. Julie caught it first. Noah's name was misspelled, Noel Parker. She started to speak up, but Noah gently stopped her. "Not worth it." They found table 16, tucked near the back of the ballroom, by the balcony. Around them sat a few unfamiliar faces, likely mid-level staff from Walter's firm, also not important enough for the center tables. Noah pulled out Julie's chair, his eyes drifting toward the family section. Walter was laughing loud, one hand on his eldest son's shoulder, the other raising a glass with old friends from Fairmore Bank. Noah didn't expect anything. Dinner stretched through 3 courses with wine poured generously. The atmosphere was loud, familiar, but emotionally cold. Noah ate just enough to be polite. Julie, meanwhile, kept scanning the room, watching every glance thrown their way like she was tracking movement on a battlefield. When the lights dimmed and the MC took the stage, the tone shifted. A quick intro, then a highlight reel. Clips of Walter from his younger years to now. Contract signings, company milestones, major deals. Noah's 2 brothers appeared over and over, cutting ribbons, speaking at finance summits, sitting on investor panels. Not a single frame of Noah, not one. Then Walter stepped on stage, 3-piece suit, deep blue tie, every move polished. He opened with a few stories from the early days, hardships, hustle, expansion, his voice steady, not dramatic but sharp and definitive. When he got to the part about family, he said, "I'm proud to have built not just a company, but a generation to carry it forward." Walter paused, eyes on his 2 sons at the head table. Matthew, with unmatched sharpness, and Caleb, decisive even when I hesitated. "Both of them have made me believe that the legacy I leave behind won't just be a company, but a vision, fully inherited." Applause broke out. Julie gripped Noah's hand under the table, her eyes starting to flicker with warning. Walter continued, "And then there's Noah." The whole room paused for half a beat. Every head turned toward table 16. "He cooks," which is a pretty handy skill if, say, we ever run out of investment capital. He smiled, a cold, flat smile. A few people laughed, awkwardly. A few nods, the kind people give when they're not sure if it's a joke. Julie tightened her grip like she was holding a grenade that had just started to tremble in her hand. Noah didn't move, didn't purse his lips, didn't blink. Just tilted his head slightly like he was listening to someone talk about a stranger. Walter said nothing more about Noah. He pivoted back to thanking board members, partners, and closed with a toast to the future of the firm. Noah stood up before the lights even came back on. He pulled out Julie's chair and placed his napkin on the table. "Where are you going?" she whispered. "Home. There's nothing left to hear." His voice was calm, still, like water. Julie looked like she wanted to say something, but instead just let out a quiet sigh and stood up to follow him. They walked out of the ballroom under a wave of sidelong glances, some people avoiding eye contact, others giving subtle nods, as if to say, "I get it." The door closed behind them. Inside, Walter kept shaking hands with partners, never once looking toward the exit. Julie didn't say a word when they got home. She unlocked the door, let Noah walk in first, then quietly set her keys on the table. Noah didn't look at anyone. He didn't take off his suit jacket. Didn't turn on the lights. He walked straight to his office, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small dark wooden box, the one place where he kept the only thing that still reminded him why he ever started. The chef's knife was wrapped carefully in velvet. The blade shone like it had just been sharpened. 3 words were etched into the handle, forged by fire. His mother once told him, fire cooks food, but it also reveals the truth of the metal. Noah gently wiped down every edge with a soft cloth, then placed the knife back in its box, not to store it, but to prepare it. The next morning, he went to the flagship restaurant. Condensation still clung to the front glass from the weekend's last service. He met with Julia, the events manager, and said simply, "Move the private investor dinner to next week, Friday night." She looked surprised but didn't ask questions. Just nodded, flipped the calendar, and marked it. Then Noah sat down at the computer and began drafting the guest list. No emails, no press, just 12 names, each one hand-picked, printed on thick cardstock, sealed with the Parker & Co. emblem. Every name belonged to someone powerful in the finance world, people who had either worked with or once respected Walter Parker at different points in his career. Noah gave no explanation. The only message on the invitation read, "An evening of memory, taste, and legacy." He didn't send one to his father. Instead, he picked up the phone and called Gary, an old friend, now a portfolio manager at Walter's firm. "Think you can pass along a message for me?" Noah said. "What's this about?" Gary asked. "Just tell him there's a dinner he won't want to miss." "That's it?" "That's it." Gary didn't press further, but his voice paused, just a fraction, like he understood something was coming. Something quiet, but deep enough to rattle even someone like Walter. For the next 7 days, Noah barely left the kitchen. No music, no phone. He told the entire staff he'd be designing the menu himself and preparing each dish by hand. No one was allowed in the kitchen, except for his 2 most trusted sous chefs. The first dish he worked on was mashed potatoes, a recipe his mother used to make on cold nights. Just potatoes, cream, a bit of butter and pepper, but she had a way of making it taste like warmth. Noah added his own twist: purple potatoes, mashed by hand instead of machine, and served in handcrafted ceramic bowls. The second course was pan-seared salmon, made with wild-caught fish from north of Seattle. It used to be Walter's favorite, back when he was young, before he switched to poached eggs and premium cuts of beef as part of his executive image. Noah kept the classic seasoning, sea salt and thyme, but replaced the sauce with a fermented red radish juice, giving it a sharp, clean acidity. The dessert was the only dish he didn't alter at all. Apple pie, using his grandmother's original recipe. The crust made from flour, lard, and cold water, mixed entirely by hand. Thin sliced apples, just the right amount of cinnamon, and raw brown sugar. He had made that pie every holiday since he was 12. Noah wrote down every dish, every ingredient, no substitutions allowed. This dinner wasn't a product. It was memory. It was the way he told the story of his family in the only language he truly knew: food. All that week, the steady rhythm of a knife hitting the cutting board echoed through the kitchen. No complaints, no sighs, just the scent rising from simmering sauces, the hiss of butter meeting hot pans, and the sharp flare of flames when he flipped a skillet too fast. It was like he was rehearsing an old piece of music, not to perform it, but to strip away the dust. Julie stopped by sometimes. She never came inside, just stood at the doorway and watched. One night, she asked, "Are you doing all this to get back at him?" Noah didn't look up. "No, I don't need him to apologize. I just need him to see." Julie said nothing. She understood. This wasn't defiance. It was his own quiet way of saying, "I was here, I tried, and you don't get to pretend I never existed." As Friday approached, Noah personally checked every detail: lighting, seating, table layout. Each plate was placed on a small card, not labeled with dish names but with fragments of memory. Winter evenings 1999, after church Sunday 2002, Thanksgiving with Grandma. He didn't want them to just eat. He wanted them to remember. And if even one person, just one, realized they were being told a story that someone had tried to bury, then the dinner had done its job. Friday night arrived with a completely different energy than any event Parker & Co. had ever hosted. No branded backdrops, no photographers, no PR staff flashing smiles on cue. Just soft amber lighting, a long walnut table at the center of the room, and pale white tablecloths pressed smooth without a single crease. Each seat was marked with a small name card, black ink handwritten. No titles, no honorifics. 10 guests showed up. Most were faces who had known Walter Parker through major deals or from his early years at the helm. A few greeted each other with a polite, "Been a while," but no one was overly excited. They were dressed respectfully, but not stiff, like they already understood this wasn't going to be a typical wine and dine evening. Walter was the last to arrive, exactly 5 minutes past the time printed on the invitation. No one looked annoyed, no one rushed to greet him. Just a few nods, a few quick glances that said all they needed to. Polite, detached, transactional. He wore a light gray suit, no tie, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone. Just enough to maintain the image, just enough to show he didn't really know what he was walking into. Walter glanced around the room once. His eyes paused for half a second on the chef's knife placed at the center of the table. Forged by fire. He didn't ask, didn't greet anyone, just quietly pulled out a chair at the far end of the table and sat down. No opening speech, no host. The first course arrived 10 minutes later, a smooth serving of mashed potatoes in a cream-colored porcelain bowl, lightly dusted with nutmeg and crispy shallots. Next to it, a small slip of paper, handwritten in neat, rounded letters. Winter evenings, 1999. Warmth came from more than just the heater. No one spoke for the first 5 minutes. They ate. Most furrowed their brows, not in discomfort but in recognition, like something buried was trying to surface. A gray-haired man near Walter murmured, "Tastes like something I used to know." No one responded. The second course arrived. Pan-seared salmon with crisp skin, resting on a pale pink ring of fermented radish sauce, accented by thin slices of beet around the edge. The note beside it read, "Lake House Dinners, Summer of 1987, before everything became about margins." A woman in a silk dress looked up and asked, "Who designed the menu?" No one answered. The server simply gave a slight bow and stepped away. And so it continued. Each dish brought out quietly, without rush, without fanfare. No one spoke much. No one checked their phones. They just ate, as if the food itself was telling them something they had forgotten, or something they had once chosen not to remember. Dessert came nearly 2 hours later. A slice of apple pie, perfectly portioned, topped with a dusting of powdered sugar and a small scoop of handmade vanilla ice cream. No flowers, no exotic notes. So simple it was almost painfully familiar. Next to it, the card read, "Sunday afternoons with Grandma." No business talk allowed. As guests lifted their spoons, Noah stepped out from the kitchen. There was no music, no announcement. Noah simply opened the door, walked calmly to the table, and stopped behind Walter, who at that moment was watching the scoop of ice cream melt slowly on his plate. Noah wasn't wearing a suit, no dress shirt, just a clean white chef's uniform. Sleeves neatly rolled to the elbow, apron crisp, freshly pressed, no logo, no name tag. He stood there. No bow, no smile, no request to speak. "I wasn't born to be your third edition," Noah said, his voice steady, like a knife slicing through pie crust. The entire table turned to look, but Walter didn't. He just lifted his head slightly and stared straight ahead. "But I still carry the Parker name." No one interrupted. No clink of spoons on plates, no sighs. The entire room felt strung tight by an invisible thread. Everyone could feel it, but no one dared touch it. Walter slowly picked up the menu. Plain black and white print. No photos. Just a list of dishes with notes. He read it line by line, carefully, top to bottom. No skipping, no questions, no comments. When he reached the final line, "Forged by fire, it takes more than heat to make something whole," he paused. His fingers tightened slightly around the paper. Not enough to crumple it, but enough for the tremble to show. Noah didn't say anything else. Didn't wait for a reaction. He gave a small nod, turned, and walked back toward the kitchen door. The light from inside the kitchen cast a faint glow across the back of his jacket, drawing a soft line between 2 generations, 2 worlds, and a night where no one was invited to speak, but everyone heard exactly what they needed to. The next morning, Noah arrived at the restaurant early, like always. The kitchen was still quiet, save for a few prep staff who had been there since before dawn. He was going over the delivery logs when Julia came in through the side door, holding a neatly folded financial newspaper. "You should see this," she said, her voice carrying a note of surprise she couldn't quite hide. Page A3. Just below a front-page feature on the real estate market, there it was, half a column long. "Dinner at Parker & Co., the art of reclaiming identity through taste." No byline, no photos of the food. Just sharp, evocative lines describing how a meal could stir memories too deep, too painful, or too personal to ever be spoken out loud. No mention of Noah. No mention of Walter. But anyone who had been there knew exactly what the piece was about, and exactly who it was for. Noah finished reading, folded the paper, and set it down on the counter. He said nothing, just took off his watch, rolled up his sleeves, and stepped into the kitchen. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed, unknown number. He let it ring. 2 hours later, Julia came back, holding out the phone. "You should take this. Third time they've called." Noah took it. On the other end was a man with a deep, steady voice, one of the investors who had stood alongside Walter back in the 90s. He didn't waste words. "I want to talk about bringing Parker & Co. to New York. Not a franchise, a full branch. Same dinner format as last night. If you're open to it, I can fly in next week." Noah paused for a moment, then answered with a short, steady line, "I'll have my assistant call you back." He hung up, took off his apron, walked to the back, washed his hands, and returned to finish the sauce he'd been working on. No smile, no surprise, and no thought of calling Walter. He didn't need him to know. 3 weeks passed. The restaurant ran smoothly. Guests started asking more and more about the dinner that night. Some booked entire tables hoping to taste what made the finance world go silent. But Noah didn't repeat it. He kept the menu seasonal, just as he always had. No one mentioned Walter. No one dared to ask. And Noah didn't bring him up. Until one Thursday afternoon, before the restaurant had opened, there was a knock at the front door. 3 short, deliberate taps. Julia opened the door. Outside stood Walter. No warning, no security, no assistant. A plain black suit, tie folded into his pocket, hair combed neatly as always, but something in his expression had settled, quieted. "Looking to make a reservation?" Julia asked, a little caught off guard. "Just one seat, nothing special." She glanced toward the kitchen window. Noah met her eyes and gave a single nod, no words. Walter was led to the table by the window, where the afternoon light spilled gently across the grain of the wood. No one spoke to him except the lead server, who had already been instructed by Noah. The menu from that night. Exactly as it was, no changes. Walter sat upright. Didn't touch his phone, didn't ask for water. He ate each course like he was reading a diary someone had written, one he'd never taken the time to open. No rush, no reaction, no sighs. Every time a dish was cleared, he gave a slight nod. No comments. At dessert, he sat for 5 extra minutes, staring at the apple pie like it was something he'd seen before, not in a restaurant but in a kitchen from long ago. A kitchen that was warm, old, far away. Then he set his spoon down, wiped his mouth with the white cloth napkin. As he stood, he folded the napkin neatly and placed it in the center of the table. On it, written in slanted blue ink, was a single line. "Forged by fire. I get it now." No signature, no date, no final words. He walked out the front door. No one saw him off. No one tried to stop him. Noah stood behind the kitchen wall, watching through the gap. Just watching. He didn't step out. He didn't need to, because everything he ever needed to hear was already written on a napkin folded into 4. Noah stood behind the glass wall, hands resting lightly on the cold stainless steel counter, eyes following Walter's silhouette as it moved through the front door, across the small lobby, and slowly disappeared into the last light of day. No words were exchanged. No one followed. There was no need. Julie stood beside him, leaning gently against the brick wall. She didn't speak right away. She waited, until the hallway lights cast a soft angle across Noah's shoulder, like the final cue that the moment had passed. "You okay?" she asked quietly, no pressure in her voice. Noah nodded, a slow but certain nod. "I never needed him to say sorry," he said, voice calm. "I just needed him to stop pretending I wasn't real. That's all." Julie said nothing more. She understood. Some wounds don't need fixing, they just need to stop being ignored. In the days that followed, Walter didn't return. No calls, no flowers, no letters. But exactly 1 week later, right at the usual morning delivery hour, a small wooden box arrived at the restaurant. No sender listed, no message enclosed, just a name on the label, Noah Parker. Inside was a new logo design, printed on thick ivory cardstock. The central image was still the same old chef's knife, but this time the blade was shaped to reflect a subtle flicker of flame. Below it, in clean, understated type, "Forged by fire." And beneath that, smaller bold, "Parker & Co." No frills, no philosophy, no explanations. But every line of that design made one thing clear: who it was recognizing and what, exactly, was finally being acknowledged. Noah stared at the print for nearly 10 minutes. He didn't smile, didn't frown, didn't say a word. He simply took an old folder, slid the print inside, and placed it in his desk drawer. Not on the wall, not in the trash. He kept it, a quiet acknowledgement, late in coming, but not without meaning. From then on, he kept cooking like always. The menu changed with the seasons. Ingredients were still chosen one crate, one bundle, one cut at a time. No dish was rushed. But if you watched closely, you'd notice something different in the way he exhaled after plating a main course. Something lighter, as if he'd finally let go of a stone he'd been carrying in his back pocket for years. Not a heavy one, just heavy enough to make every step feel harder than it needed to be. Julie stayed by his side. Without pushing, without revisiting the past, she let him move at his own rhythm, never asked when he'd talk to his father again. She understood. Some things only need to happen once, in silence, and that's enough. In the restaurant's hallway, where framed photos of guest chefs lined the wall, a new wooden frame had been added. Inside it, a printout of the private investor dinner menu. Unedited, unchanged. The paper slightly wrinkled from passing through too many hands. Every guest who walked by stopped for a moment, not because of the dishes listed, but because of the quiet notes beside them. Winter evenings, 1999. After church, Sunday 2002. Thanksgiving with Grandma. No one knew the full meaning of every line, but everyone could feel it, that something deeply personal, unpolished, and real had been poured into every course. One afternoon, as the restaurant was preparing to close, an elderly couple stood for a long time in front of the framed menu. The woman turned to her husband and said softly, "Whoever wrote these lines must have cooked for someone they loved, not for customers." The man nodded, and probably had to cook alone for a very long time. Noah was just a few steps away. He heard them. He didn't turn around. He didn't speak. But for the first time in years, he smiled. Not because of the compliment, but because he knew. He no longer had anything left to prove. Not to anyone. Not even to Walter Parker. Because sometimes the ending doesn't come with forgiveness. It comes when you're finally seen for who you truly are. Not a replica. Not the lost one. But a part of the picture. A different shade, but in the same frame. And sometimes, the hardest thing to accept in a family isn't someone's difference, but the fact that they chose to live it all the way through. Noah never set out to rebel. He just didn't want to become someone else's shadow. In the end, he didn't need to defeat his father. He just needed to stand firm, so his father could no longer pretend he'd never existed. What about you? Would you have the patience not to strike back, but to speak through the one thing you love most? Have you ever chosen silence, not out of weakness, but because you believed your actions would say everything that needed to be said? If this story made you feel something, if you saw a piece of yourself in it, hit subscribe. Because here, we don't tell stories dressed up in gloss. We tell the ones that are real and right. See you in the next one.